and former White House Deputy Press Secretary Brian Morganstern to talk about it. Brian, good to see you.
Hey, Rob, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Of course, yeah. In this article, staffers point the finger at Kamala Harris and Tina Flournoy, a longtime Democratic operative who works as Harris's chief of staff and the gatekeeper. Are you surprised by any of this?
Not really, Rob. I mean, there's a reason that Vice President Harris's presidential campaign never even made it to Iowa, and then ended in a flurry of leaks of staffers claiming that she's a terrible manager and that it was a toxic work environment. Now, fast forward, and there's really one policy priority for her office, and it's the border, which has been an unmitigated disaster when this administration could have just continued the policies of President Trump and actually reduced illegal immigration, reduced human trafficking, reduced drug smuggling, and all the rest. Instead, they've basically undone all the progress and ruined it. I have to say, when we were in the Trump administration, in the Trump White House, there might be one or two anonymous leakers from somewhere in the government, and the press would run with it for days,
Sure,
breathlessly covering about all the dysfunction. Here, Rob, the old saying is, if you've lost Walter Cronkite, you've lost the country. Well, if you're a Democrat and you've lost Politico and 22 sources, all of whom seem to be Democrat staffers and supporters, well, then, man, oh, man, that is a rough place to be for Vice President Harris. An inauspicious start, 5 months of total disaster.
Yeah. I guess it's not that surprising there hasn't been more leaks because this is a very government-first administration. Trump came in there like a wrecking ball, and people that had been in government for a long time saw this person that wanted to rip everything that they believed up and start over. And, of course, they just leaked like hell because he was a threat to everything. At the end of the day, no matter what side you're on, you're all about that government and keeping that big government going. And that's what he hated. And that's why I think a lot of people hated him. The article says just 6 months in, some staffers are starting to leave, eyeing other employment opportunities. And the handling of her border visit was the latest chaotic moment. Of course, most of the mainstream media, NBC, CBS, ABC, didn't report on it last night or this morning. Are they fully intent on protecting Kamala Harris, who likely is going to be the next candidate for president?
Well, it seems like it. And I mean, Rob, as we said, it's been a total disaster. They don't seem to be covering it that way. Yeah. And it took them 5 months, 6 months to finally report on this story that her office is dysfunctional. And it took 22 sources. Yeah. I remember when it would be one anonymous source would create front page stories about President Trump. Here we have 22 stories. They finally have to report on it. That's how much dysfunction there has to be for them to actually say negative things about Vice President Harris. That's how you know it's really bad.
The same thing with this tax stuff. We talked about it the first block of the show. It's really just sad. It's sad to see how everything's devolved into this. I want to talk about,
on the
of
tax
course.
Point.
Go ahead.
Well, Rob, I just wanted to point out, in 2016, in October, the New York Times wrote a tax story about President Trump claiming he didn't pay his taxes. Mm-hmm. It was false then. His accountants came out and said it was false. The president said it was false. Fast forward to 2020 in October, the New York Times ran virtually the identical story. Again, not true. Of course, President Trump paid his taxes. So for whatever reason, the media seems to be really hung up on this angle about President Trump and taxes.
Well, they just want to kill him however they can. I want to talk about the January 6th Commission. Of course, nobody can forget the insurrection that nearly ended this country when a bunch of guys armed with flagpoles almost took over the entire country. Nancy Pelosi tapping Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney to be on the House Select Committee, because who didn't see that coming, right? To investigate January 6th, the only Republican appointed in the group. Here's how the Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy responded to that today.
What I'm saying is, it was shocking to me that if a person is a Republican, they get their committee assignments from the Republican conference. For somebody to accept committee assignments from Speaker Pelosi, that's unprecedented.
So what do you think of this commission?
Well, it's purely partisan, and Liz Cheney has made it clear that, she wants to elevate herself and get lots of attention from mainstream media outlets that are happy to put on Republicans who will criticize other Republicans. That's always been obvious to most of us, but every once in a while you have one who wants to just elevate his or herself, as in this case. And it's unfortunate because the country is facing really serious problems, and it's because of this administration's failed policies. As the opposition party, it should be a member of Congress's responsibility to point out those failings and provide alternative policy prescriptions, rather than playing into the hands of this dysfunctional administration and criticizing her own party. It's just a shame that she's gone this route. I don't see how she really survives the rest of her career as a Republican at this point, but only time will tell.
Yeah, well, she's up for re-election in 17 months or so. We will certainly follow the Liz Cheney run for re-election. That'll be a fun one, absolutely. Former White House Deputy Press Secretary Brian Morganstern, good to see you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Rob. Have a good night.
You too. Coming up.